There have been a lot of rumors recently swirling around about the Nintendo Switch 2. And what's even more interesting is there's been a lot of talk about a PlayStation Portable 2 or PlayStation Vita 2. But as the icing on top, to make it even crazier, Microsoft is developing a portable gaming handheld. If you're in the gaming space, these are all no doubt things that you have heard about very recently. And there's some truth to all this. So let's talk about it. So Nintendo is going to release a follow-up to the Switch. Tell me something we all don't already know. But this is what makes this next console cycle so potentially interesting. You have the Nintendo Switch. No more Game Boys and 3DSs and DSs over here, and GameCubes and Nintendo Wii's and Wii U's over here. Technology has caught up. It's a very interesting crossroads. In this generation, we even saw stuff like the Steam Deck, the Asus Ally. I mean, we've seen tons of these handheld PCs. Now, up until very recently, there was lots of reports coming out that Nintendo had a new handheld that was coming out this year, 2024. And if you want my opinion, I think that all those reports were very accurate. I absolutely think that Nintendo had a handheld scheduled to come out this holiday season. Now, I'm going to tell you first off, I do not think that they will call it the Nintendo Switch 2. That's just not in Nintendo's naming wheelhouse. They've never done anything like that. Now, if they want to call it like the Super Switch or the Switch U or something like that, maybe. But we're definitely not going to see a Switch 2. They're not going to go the route of the PlayStation. But what does a new console or handheld console hybrid from Nintendo look like? Will it be on par with something like an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5? And I think we all know by now the answer is probably no. And we all know that Nintendo doesn't need to do that for a number of reasons that we won't get into on this video. If you don't believe that Nintendo could make a very good game without top tier graphics, then you're not paying attention. But back to the topic at hand, Nintendo most certainly does have a new console at the very, very end of its R&D phase. There are already tons of developers out there who are using this thing and developing games for it. I personally think that the new Metroid Prime will launch for the Nintendo Switch and the next Nintendo console, whatever that may be called. Sort of like they did with the GameCube to the Wii and the Wii to the Wii U and then the Wii U to the Switch. There's always those gap jumping games. Usually it's like a Zelda game. But in this case, I think it's going to be Metroid Prime. We'll see. But I do think Nintendo had plans on announcing it this year, maybe late summer, early fall, and releasing it for the holiday season. That is very likely. Let's look at the time frames between each of the Nintendo consoles. The Switch, right now, actively has the longest lifespan of any Nintendo console. So, by historical standards, Nintendo is far overdue for a new console. But the Switch keeps selling and the games are still good. So I think they're trying to get as much out of the Switch hardware as possible. And coming out of tons and tons of hardware backlogs where electronical components have been very hard to get a hold of the last 4 years, I think Nintendo doesn't want to repeat what happened with the Nintendo Switch. Now, I know people like to think that Nintendo and other companies like to create some false scarcities, which there is a little bit of truth to that, but trust me, if Nintendo could sell 10 million consoles in its first month, you better believe that they will produce 10 million consoles. They're not shortchanging themselves just to create a little bit of scarcity. Now, Nintendo is pretty good at creating demand for their product. That's a whole separate thing. That being said, there's lots of interesting speculation and reports going around about both Microsoft and Sony. I can guarantee that both Microsoft and Sony have gaming handhelds in development. Whether or not they move past the R&D phase and actually release them, I'm not willing to put any money on that. But I can assure you that both of those companies are actively looking into releasing new portable hardware, or in Microsoft's case, their first portable hardware. What makes me say that? Because we have a market that now exists with things like the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally. So you got yourself a handheld that Steam makes that is also running a good majority of the games that are being released on Steam. So you buy a game on Steam, you can play it on your PC, and then you can also play it on this portable handheld. Now, of course, not every single game runs on a Steam Deck, and we know we got that Steam Deck verification system, but I play on an Ally, and just about every single game that I have purchased on my PC runs on my Ally. Now, of course, they're not all running in 4K at 60 frames a second, but they run, and for the most part, most of them are all playable. And you can guarantee Microsoft and Sony are taking a good, hard look at that market. Because these new portables, these Steam Decks and these Allies, they're selling well. And for the first time in video game history, you don't need to develop two separate games, one for your console and one for your handheld. This is where Sony got tripped up with the PSP and the Vita. And I actually talked about this in one of my past Tofer talks. If you want to check that video out, I have it pinned right here. So what I see happening here is Sony releases new hardware, probably the PlayStation 6. Alongside of that, they release the PlayStation 6 Portable, PSP2, Vita 2, whatever you want to call it. And they both run the same games. It's going to be the whole Nintendo Switch situation of, you know, play your game on your console, on your TV, and then grab your portable and pick up where you left off on the airplane or in your hotel room or whatever. And Microsoft is doing the same exact thing. Although I think Microsoft is probably going to lean a little more into the cloud gaming aspect, it seems. But what's really important here is there's portable hardware now that will allow these companies to run their games natively. That means not streaming, not in the cloud. The game is installed on the device and you play it native. That's what's important. So what does that mean for a new Nintendo console release? I think we're probably going to see something next spring, 2025. That seems very likely. That also seems when the new Metroid Prime is going to release. That gives Microsoft and Sony plenty of time to watch how things develop with Nintendo, with this new hardware, and keep an eye on this ever-growing handheld PC gaming market that is emerging all over the place. Now let me clarify though, I don't think Microsoft and Sony are going to do a hybrid like Nintendo where everything is played on one thing. I think that they'll release two separate pieces of hardware, kind of like Sony's doing now with the PlayStation Portal, which I think was a bit of a test to see how many people actually wanted to play their PlayStation games portably. And it worked because they sold quite a few of those things, even though it's not what we want, which is games playing natively on a piece of hardware. Either way, I think we are in for some really, really interesting times in the next year with gaming. It's really exciting. Technology is moving a lot faster than it ever has, and it's allowing for some really interesting things to be done in this space. But let me know what you think. Do you think I'm way off? Hit the comments and let me know. And also, let me know what you are most excited about. Would you like to see a new Sony handheld, or would you like to see Microsoft make a handheld? And don't forget, check out one of these two videos to catch yourself up on the last few episodes of Tofer Talks if you haven't already. Alexa, turn on the arcade.